In today's business world, everything runs on complex, automated systems. But what happens when one single tiny flaw brings your entire operation to a grinding halt? Today, we're going to dissect a real-world catastrophe to uncover a framework that helps organizations not just survive these failures, but actually thrive because of them.
Just think about that for a second. One little crack, buried deep in your systems, that triggers a chain reaction you can't predict and can barely control. I mean, it's the kind of scenario that should keep every single leader up at night. And for one of the world's biggest tech companies, this nightmare became very, very real.
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at a real-world cascading failure. Then, we'll unpack why our modern systems are, well, so fragile. After we really understand the problem, we'll introduce a powerful framework for managing all that complexity, we'll explore the pillars of true resilience, and finally, we'll get right to your specific role as a leader in building an organization that's practically unbreakable.
Okay, let's dive into our case study. A massive service disruption at Amazon Web Services. Now, this isn't just some tech story. This is a profound lesson in organizational vulnerability, and it's one that every leader really needs to understand.
Take a look at this timeline. This failure didn't happen all at once, like a big explosion. No, it was more like a slow-motion collapse. It started with a single database error just before midnight. That one error, it knocked out the servers that basically run the cloud. Then, the attempt to fix that problem ended up overwhelming the network. You can see how this becomes a domino effect, right? It just kept going, taking down critical customer-facing services one by one. It turns out, every solution they tried just created a new, bigger problem.
So, here's the crucial takeaway. In a tightly integrated, automated system, there's really no such thing as a small, isolated problem. A tiny crack in one corner can, and as we saw, often will, lead to a system-wide shatter that brings your core business operations to a dead stop for hours.
And you have to understand, this wasn't just a technical glitch. It was a symptom of a much, much deeper problem that pretty much every modern organization faces. Trying to manage systems that have just become too complex for any one person to fully wrap their head around.
And this right here is the heart of the issue. We build these incredibly powerful, complex systems, but we can't actually see all the hidden connections and dependencies between the parts. In their report, AWS called the cause a latent race condition, which is a fancy way of saying it was a hidden software flaw that only shows up when a very specific, super unlikely sequence of events happens. It was basically a ticking time bomb that nobody even knew was there.
You know, we pour all this money into automation with the promise of self-healing, resilient systems, but the reality here, it was the exact opposite. The system entered what AWS called Congestive Collapse. It was so overwhelmed with errors that it couldn't even process the commands to fix itself. The automation completely failed, and the only way out was slow, careful manual intervention by engineers. So, if we can't eliminate complexity, how in the world do we manage the risk? How do we build systems, and more importantly, teams that can actually navigate all this uncertainty? Well, the answer isn't in more complicated plans. It's in a simpler, much more adaptive framework.
Let's talk about Scrum. Now, you might hear that word and think it's just something for software developers, but look at the actual definition. It gets to the absolute core of our problem. It's a framework designed specifically to solve complex problems by being adaptive. See, it's not about having a perfect plan from the start. It's about having a perfect process for dealing with an imperfect world.
At its heart, Scrum is really just a simple feedback loop, designed for learning. So instead of trying to execute some massive, rigid plan, teams work in these short, quick cycles. They deliver a small piece of value, they inspect the outcome with real stakeholders, and then they adapt their plan based on what they just learned. It's a process for navigating uncertainty, not just blindly following a map.
So how does this simple little loop build a resilient organization? Well, Scrum isn't just a process. It's actually built on 3 pillars that directly combat the exact kind of failure we saw at AWS. First up is transparency. Remember that latent defect, that hidden flaw buried deep in the AWS system? Transparency is all about making the work, the processes, and the problems visible to everybody. When the real state of things is out in the open, those hidden flaws have fewer places to hide, and teams can spot risks and dependencies before they turn into a catastrophe.
The second pillar is inspection. That AWS failure cascaded for hours because the initial problems just went completely unnoticed until their effects were massive. Scrum builds in a rhythm of frequent inspection. We're talking daily, weekly, not as a way to micromanage, but as an early warning system. It lets teams catch those little deviations and problems when they're still small and manageable.
And finally, there's adaptation.
Because, let's be honest, inspection is pretty useless if you can't act on what you find. Adaptation is the muscle that lets a team change course immediately. It's the polar opposite of that congestive collapse that needed hours of manual recovery. A team that is truly empowered to adapt can respond to a problem in minutes, not hours. This quote from the Scrum Guide says it all, really. The entire framework isn't just about finding problems. It's designed to provoke change. It gives teams the structure and, just as important, the permission to fix things the moment they're discovered. That's how you build a culture of proactive problem solving.
So, this brings us to the most important question of all. What is your role as a leader in all of this? Look, you don't need to be writing code or re-architecting systems. What you do need to do is create the environment where a resilient, adaptive culture can actually take root and grow. As a leader, your main job is to be an architect of empowerment. What does that mean? It means trusting your teams to solve the problems they are closest to. Your job is to clear the path for them, to dismantle the bureaucracy and the silos that just create friction and slow things down. And maybe your most important contribution is to champion the values that make all this possible: courage, respect, and a commitment to facing the truth no matter how tough it is.
And this right here, this is a huge point for every executive listening. True empowerment isn't just a slogan you put on a poster. It's a structural change. It means giving people clear accountability, like the product owner in Scrum, and then you have to actually respect their decisions. When the entire organization backs the people it has empowered, that's when you unlock incredible speed and adaptability.
So, here's the ultimate takeaway. In a world of spiraling complexity, you will never prevent every single failure. It's an impossible goal. But what you can do is build an organization with the transparency, the discipline, and the empowerment to withstand the shocks, to adapt, and to recover faster and stronger. And that is the essence of true resilience. Thank you for watching this episode of Implementing Scrum Unscripted. Please subscribe to this channel to learn more about implementing Scrum in the real world so you can focus, deliver,